The Galactic Union broadcasted the first distress call on a frequency reserved for catastrophic emergencies, an act unheard of in the last 1,000 years. It was a desperate plea, punctuated by static and the garbled screams of an officer whose voice had long since abandoned all sense of decorum. "This is the Darren Defense Fleet. We are under siege. The humans, by the void, the humans have snapped. They are not negotiating, they are not demanding, they are taking. They are everywhere. They—" Silence. The frequency cut off abruptly. No one knew what happened after that, only that the Darren Empire, a civilization that had dominated the galaxy for centuries, ceased to exist within a standard cycle. What had pushed humanity, the once oddly polite, ever patient, and weirdly stubborn species, to unleash its wrath? That was the question every race in the Galactic Union was asking, whispering in hushed, fearful tones. They should have seen it coming. When humans first entered the galactic scene, they were something of an anomaly. A species that wasn't particularly strong, fast, or physically imposing compared to the other races, yet one that survived and thrived through sheer willpower and ingenuity. They didn't have the biggest fleets, nor the most powerful weapons, but they had patience. An almost unnatural patience. It started with trade negotiations. The humans would sit across from bureaucrats who thought themselves master negotiators, listening to their outrageous demands with a polite smile. Where most species would storm out or threaten war, the humans would chuckle, shake their heads, and say, "We'll revisit this discussion later." And they did. Again. And again. And again. They waited. They bided their time. They watched as empires grew complacent, comfortable in their perceived superiority. They let the arrogant powers take advantage of them, gouge them on deals, impose unfair tariffs, and treat them as a species of no consequence. It was all noted. The humans never forgot. Then came the Darren incident. It started small, a mining dispute. The Darren Empire had taken control of a resource-rich asteroid belt that the humans had legally purchased. When the humans protested, the Darrens laughed, their diplomats waving off the complaints as if swatting away a gnat. When humanity escalated the issue to the Galactic Union, the Darrens doubled down. They deployed ships. Not a warning, not a fine, ships. They set up blockade patrols and even fired warning shots at human freighters attempting to retrieve their legally acquired resources. The humans, ever patient, took the matter to the Union courts, trusting in the system. They waited. Years passed. Bureaucratic delays, legal loopholes, political interference, all working against them. Then the Darrens made a mistake. They didn't just steal from humanity. They didn't just abuse the humans' patience. They killed humans. A small transport vessel carrying engineers was destroyed when it strayed too close to the blockade. The Darrens claimed it was an accident. The Union debated the matter for months, discussing whether reparations should be paid or if an official apology was even necessary. The humans said nothing. They just waited. Until one day, without warning, they stopped waiting. The first strike came at the Darren military outpost in the Frelka system. There was no declaration of war. No demands. Just obliteration. Human warships, sleek and brutal, entered the system and unleashed a barrage so precise that every single Darren ship was disabled within minutes. No survivors. No prisoners. The Galactic Union scrambled for answers. "Humans! Cease this madness! You are violating interstellar law!" The humans replied with a simple message. Interstellar law did nothing when our people were murdered. Now it does not apply to us. Then came the invasions. Not just the Frelka system. Not just the mining outposts. Everywhere. The Darren's core worlds were under siege within a standard cycle. The humans moved with terrifying efficiency, like they had been planning this for years. Because they had. They had waited. They had endured every insult, every theft, every slight, recording, cataloging, preparing. And when the moment came, they didn't ask for negotiations. They didn't demand justice. They took it. By the time the Union realized what was happening, it was too late. The Darren Empire no longer existed. The broadcast that followed sent a chill through the galaxy. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement. The image of a human commander, his uniform pristine, his face devoid of emotion, standing before the ruins of what was once the Darren capital. His voice calm. Controlled. Humanity has been patient. Humanity has endured. But patience is not infinite. There is a cost for betrayal. A price for murder. A debt that has now been collected. To the Galactic Union, hear this well, we are not conquerors. We do not seek war. But we remember. And we will never wait again. The transmission ended. The galaxy stood in silence. Because for the first time in its long history, the most feared power in the cosmos was not the empire with the largest fleet, nor the species with the deadliest weapons. It was the ones who had waited. And waited. And then snapped. The Union met in emergency session. The surviving empires debated, panicked, pleaded for some kind of resolution. But humanity said nothing. They had made their statement. And now, every species in the galaxy lived with the knowledge that there was no undoing what had been done. That in the vast, cold darkness of space, there was only one universal truth. You could cheat the strong. You could manipulate the weak. But you should never test the patience of humanity. Because when it finally ran out, no species would ever forget. The Galactic Union did what it always did in times of crisis. It debated. The council chambers of the Union, a vast dome constructed from crystalline alloys, had never been so filled with voices of panic. Delegates from every major race gathered, not to pass resolutions or negotiate new trade agreements, but to discuss a singular, horrifying question. What do we do about the humans? A race that had, until now, been the most patient, cooperative, and diplomatic species in known history had just annihilated an entire empire with no warning and no hesitation. And worse? They weren't asking for anything in return. That terrified them more than any warlord ever could. The debate raged for days, each species throwing accusations and counterarguments. The Earthens, an insectoid race known for their meticulous record-keeping, insisted that technically, the humans had followed procedure for decades before acting. The bureaucrats of the Mechari, a reptilian species who had always taken pride in their legal maneuvering, whispered that perhaps the humans had simply followed their example, waiting for the right moment to strike. But it was the Jerval delegate, a long-limbed, owl-faced creature with a voice like shifting gravel, who finally spoke the words that none dared to utter. We created this. We mistook patience for weakness. We pushed and they held. We pushed again, and they endured. And now, there is no more patience left. The chamber fell into stunned silence. For centuries, the Union had functioned as a delicate balance of power, where the strongest ruled through influence, and the weaker races maneuvered around them through trade and diplomacy. The humans had changed all that. They had waited. And then, without warning, they had shattered that balance in an instant. Now, the galaxy lived in fear of their silence. And worse still, humanity was still watching. The first sign that the situation was far worse than anyone realized came not from a grand invasion, nor a declaration of war, but something smaller. Colder. The humans stopped attending Union meetings. For decades, the humans had been involved in every diplomatic discussion, every economic negotiation, every minor trade dispute. They had been present in every major decision, their ambassadors calm, collected, their diplomats polite and deliberate. But now, their seats were empty. The official reports claimed it was due to security concerns, but everyone knew better. The humans were waiting again. And no one knew what for. While the Union debated, the real consequences were playing out in the outer systems. Trade collapsed overnight. Human cargo ships, once a staple of interstellar commerce, vanished from the major trade routes. Entire economies, dependent on the reliable and efficient transport networks humans had built, crumbled. The Mechari banking syndicates panicked, their markets crashing as they realized they had undervalued human economic influence for years. Colonial planets that had once relied on human technology to keep their agricultural systems running found their food supplies dwindling. The famed Earthen bureaucratic networks, which had depended on human-built computational systems, suddenly found themselves crippled. The humans had not fired a single shot since the Darren Purge. And yet, they were breaking the galaxy, piece by piece. Through inaction. Through absence. It was a kind of warfare the galaxy had never seen before. A war of patience. A war of attrition, where no fleets clashed, no soldiers marched, only silence and the slow, inevitable collapse of everything the Union had built. And then the disappearances started. The first to go missing was Lord Evkril, a high-ranking noble from the Torvash Dominion. His personal cruiser was found adrift in deep space, its engines dead, its crew unresponsive. The ship's logs showed that, just before contact was lost, a single transmission had overridden all systems. A human voice. "We remember." Then he was gone. No ransom. No demands. Just gone. Then came the corporate executives of the Mechari. The bureaucrats of the Earthen. The warlords of the Jervel. One by one, the most powerful individuals in the galaxy, those who had profited most from humanity's patience, vanished without a trace. The Union scrambled to respond. Search teams were deployed. Fleets patrolled the void. Entire planets went on high alert. But the humans? They said nothing. They did nothing. They simply waited. And the galaxy, for the first time in its long history, was learning what it meant to fear patience. Desperation set in. Some of the more reckless empires tried to retaliate. The Kresh Dominion, a brutal warrior race who had long believed humans to be too soft for real war, launched an attack on a minor human colony in the far reaches of Union space. A colony with no military defenses. No fleet protection. The Kresh thought they would teach humanity a lesson in strength. Instead, they disappeared. Not just the attacking fleet. Their entire homeworld. Gone. No wreckage. No distress signals. Only a single transmission, broadcast on all frequencies. A human voice, calm and deliberate. "We have waited long enough." And that was when the Union finally understood. The humans had never been weak. They had never been helpless. They had simply been waiting for the right moment. And now, that moment had come. Panic spread like wildfire. The remaining empires scrambled to make peace, sending desperate messages to Earth, to human colonies, to any diplomat or ambassador who might still be listening. No response. No demands. Just silence. The galaxy had spent centuries under the illusion that power came from military might, from economic control, from political influence. But the humans had taught them the most important lesson of all. True power came from patience. From knowing when to strike. And when to wait. Now, the galaxy could do nothing but wait in turn. Because no one knew what humanity would do next. And worse? No one wanted to find out. The universe held its breath. For the first time in recorded history, the Galactic Union was afraid. Not of war. Not of invasion. Not of some great superweapon. They were afraid of silence. The humans had made no further moves, issued no demands, deployed no fleets. They simply waited. And in that silence, entire empires began to crumble under the weight of their own fear. The Mechari banking syndicates collapsed first. Without human economic participation, their interstellar credit system was rendered useless. Panic set in. Civil unrest broke out on dozens of worlds. Financial institutions, once thought indestructible, crumbled like sandcastles beneath a rising tide. The Jerval, the masters of diplomacy and political manipulation, found themselves ignored. Their envoys sent desperate pleas to Earth, to Mars, to every human colony. They begged for an audience, for a single response. None came. It was a slow, agonizing death. The Earthens, who had once prided themselves on their meticulous records and bureaucratic efficiency, found themselves trapped in a nightmare of their own making. Every system, every protocol, every administrative function of their empire was dependent on human-built computational networks. And the humans? They had turned them off. Then, the disappearances stopped. Not because the humans had been appeased. Not because the Union had found a solution. But because there was no one left to take. Every warlord. Every bureaucrat. Every corporate executive who had ever wronged humanity, ever slighted them, ever taken advantage of their patience, gone. The galaxy shuddered at the realization. Humanity had not acted out of rage. Not out of revenge. They had acted with precision. There had been no massacres. No indiscriminate destruction. No mindless war. Only targeted removal. The powerful were no longer powerful. The manipulators could no longer manipulate. And in their absence, the galaxy burned itself down. Desperation took hold. The last remaining leaders of the Union gathered in secret, their faces pale with fear. The once great Torvash Dominion had lost control of half its territory. The Kresh Dominion was a ghost, a name spoken only in hushed whispers. Entire civilizations had been reduced to ruins without a single shot being fired in retaliation. And the humans? They still did nothing. "We must do something," a Mechari diplomat rasped, his scales dull from stress. "We cannot live like this. We must force them to the table." "And how do you propose we do that?" the Jerval delegate sneered. "We cannot force a species that has already won." Silence. Because that was the truth, wasn't it? Humanity had already won. Without fleets. Without weapons. Without war. They had simply waited. And then, when they struck, they had done so with the precision of a scalpel, cutting out only the rot, leaving the galaxy to collapse under its own weight. The Union had never truly understood the humans. Not when they entered the stars. Not when they negotiated deals. Not when they endured every slight, every insult, every theft. They had mistaken patience for weakness. And now, they were paying the price. That was when the humans finally spoke. The message came without warning, transmitted on every known frequency, in every known language. The voice was calm. Collected. A human. An admiral. His face unreadable. His uniform immaculate. "The Galactic Union has failed. You built a system on exploitation. You built a society on manipulation. And when we followed your rules, when we played your game, you called us weak. We were never weak. We were waiting." The galaxy listened in absolute silence. "We have taken only what was owed. We have removed only those who betrayed trust. We have allowed your empires to fall by their own hands. You will rebuild. Or you will not. That is no longer our concern." A pause. And then, "But remember this, we will never wait again." The transmission cut. And the galaxy knew. There would be no second chances. No second warnings. Humanity had waited once. They would never wait again. And no species in the universe would ever forget the moment their patience finally snapped. The galaxy had changed. The old powers, the mighty empires, the untouchable aristocracies, the corporate overlords who had once shaped interstellar policy, were gone. Not in a blaze of war, not through the rise of some new conquering force, but through absence. Humanity had not ruled. Humanity had not conquered. Humanity had simply stopped playing the game. And that, more than anything, had broken the galaxy beyond recognition. The Galactic Union still existed, on paper. The Grand Council chambers still stood, but they were empty. The empires still claimed authority, but no one listened. There were no fleets left to enforce control, no bureaucracies left to manage trade, no corporations left to finance the illusion of stability. It was over. And the ones who remained, the survivors, the politicians, the desperate voices clinging to the idea of the old ways, could do nothing but stare at the void where their former leaders had once stood and wonder how they had let this happen. The first planets to collapse were the ones that had relied the most on exploitation. The Torvash Dominion's vast industrial worlds, once fueled by cheap labor and backroom deals, fell into anarchy overnight. Without the economic grip of their merchant lords, the factories shut down, the supply lines withered, and the workers, forgotten for generations, walked away. The Mercury banking syndicates, which had once controlled nearly half of the interstellar credit flow, found themselves utterly irrelevant. Without human trade, without human logistical networks, without human trust, their currencies became worthless. The great banking clans turned on one another in a desperate scramble for control, but there was nothing left to control. The Earthen bureaucracy, once the backbone of the Union's record-keeping, collapsed under its own weight. They had spent centuries perfecting laws, regulations, and treaties, believing themselves untouchable because they understood the rules better than anyone else. But when the humans had stopped playing, the rules had meant nothing. And now, the Earthens were drowning in their own paperwork, their own inefficiencies, unable to even manage their own crumbling worlds. And still, the humans did not interfere. They had done what they needed to do, and then they had walked away. The galaxy was forced to do something it had never done before. It had to rebuild without humanity. It started small. Independent colonies, once overlooked by the great empires, began forging their own paths. Planets that had long been treated as resource hubs, as labor camps, as stepping stones for the rich and powerful, suddenly found themselves free. And in that freedom, a new kind of civilization began to take shape. Trade routes re-emerged, not through vast bureaucratic institutions, but through simple agreements between worlds that actually needed each other. New alliances were formed, not out of conquest or manipulation, but because of mutual necessity. For the first time in galactic history, species began to listen to one another, not because they feared war, but because they had no other choice. The era of the great empires was over. In its place was something smaller, more fragile, but real. And humanity? Humanity watched. When the first delegation arrived at Earth, there was no grand meeting, no pomp or ceremony. The visitors were not politicians, not warlords. They were survivors. A delegation of beings who had witnessed the fall of everything they had known, and who had come not to bargain, not to negotiate, but to understand, to apologize, and to ask a single question. What happens now? The humans, as always, were patient. They listened. And then they answered. Now you do what we did. You wait. You rebuild. You earn trust, instead of demanding it. You do better. The delegation left, their heads bowed, their minds heavy with the weight of those words. And for the first time, the galaxy began to heal, not through force, not through manipulation, not through power, but through understanding, through patience. Because they had learned the lesson the hard way. And they would never forget.